There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that the person who once insisted they were finished with you somehow never completely disappears. They may vanish for months or even years, only to suddenly send a message, appear where you least expect them, or find subtle ways to remind you of their presence. This behavior leaves many people asking the same question: if they didn't care about me, why can't they let me go? The answer often has far less to do with love than most people imagine. It has everything to do with control. A narcissistic person builds relationships differently from someone who seeks genuine intimacy. Instead of viewing love as a partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual care, they often view relationships through the lens of influence. They feel secure when they believe they can predict your reactions, shape your decisions, and control the emotional atmosphere around them. The relationship becomes less about sharing life with another person and more about maintaining a position where they feel powerful, admired, and emotionally significant. As long as they believe they have that position, they experience a sense of stability. But the moment that control begins to slip away, something changes inside them. It creates discomfort that they struggle to resolve. Think about what happens when someone believes they have written the ending to a story, only to discover someone else has turned the page without their permission. That is often what it feels like when you choose to leave a controlling relationship without continuing the emotional cycle they expected. Perhaps there was a time when every disagreement ended with you apologizing just to restore peace. Maybe every period of silence ended with you reaching out first because the distance became unbearable. Maybe every criticism caused you to work harder to prove your worth. Over time, these patterns create expectations. The narcissistic individual begins to assume that no matter what happens, you will eventually return to the role they assigned you. They become confident that they understand your emotional triggers and know exactly which words, behaviors, or promises will bring you back. This confidence reinforces their sense of control, making them believe the relationship is still operating according to their rules. Then something unexpected happens. Instead of arguing, you become quiet. Instead of defending yourself, you stop explaining. Instead of chasing after closure, you accept that some questions may never receive satisfying answers. Instead of trying to convince them to understand your pain, you begin focusing on your own healing. From your perspective, these changes may simply reflect emotional exhaustion and a desire for peace. But from theirs, something far more significant has occurred. The familiar pattern has been interrupted. The script they relied on has suddenly changed, and they are no longer directing the outcome. For someone who depends on predictability to feel secure, this can be deeply unsettling. They are left facing uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the most uncomfortable experiences for a person who seeks control above all else. Human beings naturally seek closure, but individuals with strong narcissistic traits often want a very specific kind of closure. They want the ending that protects their ego. They want to believe they were the one who decided when the relationship ended. They want to believe you still need them, still think about them, and still hope for another chance. When you quietly move forward without begging for their attention or waiting for their that comforting conclusion, the story no longer ends with their victory. Instead, it ends with your independence. That can leave the relationship feeling unfinished in their mind, not because they are grieving the loss of genuine emotional intimacy, but because they are struggling to accept the loss of influence they once believed was permanent. This is why many people are surprised when a narcissistic individual suddenly reappears after a long period of silence. They may send an innocent-looking message asking how you've been. They may comment on something you posted online. They may ask mutual friends whether you're seeing someone or whether you've been successful in your career. Sometimes they create situations that seem accidental, hoping to cross paths with you. These actions can easily be mistaken for love, regret, or a desire to reconnect. But often, they serve another purpose. They are testing whether the emotional connection they once controlled is still available. They are searching for evidence that they can still affect your thoughts, your feelings, or your decisions. Even a brief emotional reaction can reassure them that they have not completely lost their influence. What makes this dynamic especially confusing is that genuine love and the desire for control can sometimes look similar on the surface. Both may involve frequent communication, both may involve expressions of missing someone, both may involve attempts to reconnect after separation. The difference lies beneath the behavior. Healthy love respects boundaries, accepts another person's freedom, and prioritizes their well-being even when the relationship ends. A desire for control struggles to accept boundaries because boundaries represent independence. It resists freedom because freedom removes the ability to influence. It seeks contact not always to restore connection, but to restore certainty that the other person remains emotionally accessible. Understanding this distinction helps explain why someone may repeatedly return even after treating you poorly. Their actions are not necessarily evidence of deep affection. They may simply reflect discomfort with losing the control they once assumed would always be available. One of the most powerful shifts occurs when you stop responding the way they expect. Imagine someone pressing the same button over and over, expecting the same result, only to discover the mechanism no longer works. That is often what happens when you develop healthy emotional boundaries. The criticism that once made you doubt yourself no longer defines your worth. The silent treatment that once filled you with anxiety no longer sends you into panic. The guilt that once manipulated your decisions begins to lose its effectiveness. Your calm becomes unfamiliar to them because it cannot be controlled in the same way your fear once could. This change often creates curiosity, frustration, or even renewed attempts to regain your attention. They may increase their efforts, believing they simply need to try harder. But what they are really confronting is the reality that the person they once influenced has become emotionally stronger. There is profound strength in recognizing that your peace is not something another person can grant or take away. When you stop measuring your value by their reactions, their approval loses much of its power. You no longer feel compelled to explain every decision or defend every boundary. You realize that protecting your emotional well-being is not selfish but necessary. This quiet confidence often surprises those who once relied on your self-doubt. They expected resistance they could overcome, arguments they could win, or emotional responses they could manipulate. Instead, they encounter calm, clarity, and consistency. Those qualities are difficult to control because they come from inner security rather than external validation. The more grounded you become, the less predictable you are to someone who once depended on understanding every emotional move you made. Ironically, it is not dramatic revenge or angry confrontation that leaves the greatest impression. It is peaceful independence. It is the realization that the person they believed would always remain within reach has built a life where their influence is no longer necessary. That unfinished loss of control can linger in their memory far longer than they ever expected, while you continue moving forward with a freedom that no longer depends on whether they remember you at all. One of the most difficult truths to understand after leaving a narcissistic relationship is that your healing can become the very thing that keeps you in the other person's mind. Many people assume that if a narcissist remembers them long after the relationship has ended, it must be because of love, regret, or a deep emotional bond. While those assumptions are understandable, the reality is often much different. What frequently makes someone unforgettable is not the relationship itself, but what happened after it ended. When you begin to grow into a stronger, healthier, and more confident version of yourself, you quietly challenge the story they created about who you were and who they believed you would always be. That challenge can be difficult for someone with narcissistic traits to ignore because it forces them to confront a reality that doesn't fit the version of events they carefully constructed in their own mind. A narcissistic person often depends on a carefully maintained self-image. They want to believe they are always right, always superior, and always the one who holds the greater value in every relationship. Protecting that image becomes incredibly important because much of their confidence is built on external validation rather than genuine inner security. To preserve this image, they often create narratives that place themselves in a favorable position while minimizing or distorting the experiences of others. If a relationship ends, they may convince themselves that you were the problem, that you were too emotional, too difficult, too dependent, or simply incapable of succeeding without them. These conclusions allow them to avoid taking responsibility for their behavior while preserving the belief that they remain stronger, wiser, or more desirable. At first, you may even begin to believe those stories yourself. Constant criticism, emotional manipulation, blame shifting, and repeated questioning of your reality can slowly wear down your confidence. You may start wondering whether you really are the person they described. Perhaps you question your intelligence, your judgment, or your ability to maintain healthy relationships. This self-doubt is one of the most damaging effects of prolonged emotional manipulation because it causes you to disconnect from your own instincts. Instead of trusting your experiences, you begin trusting the opinions of someone who repeatedly benefited from keeping you uncertain about your worth. Healing begins when that uncertainty slowly fades. It rarely happens overnight. There is usually no single moment where everything suddenly becomes clear. Instead, growth often unfolds through countless small decisions. You decide to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You begin setting boundaries without apologizing for them. You invest time in your physical health, emotional well-being, friendships, career, your spiritual life. You start celebrating small victories that once seemed impossible. Every healthy choice becomes another step away from the version of yourself that existed under constant emotional pressure. Little by little, you rediscover qualities that were never truly lost. Your kindness returns without becoming people-pleasing. Your confidence grows without becoming arrogance. Your compassion remains, but it is now balanced with wisdom. Most importantly, you begin making decisions based on your values instead of your fears. As your life changes, something remarkable happens. The predictions made about you begin to fail. If they insisted you would never be happy without them, your genuine smile proves otherwise. If they believed you would always seek their approval, your silence tells a different story. If they assumed no one else would appreciate you, healthy relationships quietly contradict that belief. If they expected your life to fall apart after the breakup, your steady progress becomes undeniable evidence that their assumptions were wrong. None of this requires public announcements or dramatic displays of success. Real healing often speaks in quiet, consistent ways. It appears in the peace you carry, the confidence in your decisions, the calm in your conversations, and the stability of your daily life. These changes may seem ordinary to you, but to someone invested in maintaining a false narrative, they represent a serious challenge. The reason this challenge is so significant is because it threatens the internal story they rely on to protect their ego. Admitting that you have grown without them may also require admitting that they underestimated you. It may force them to acknowledge that their influence was never as permanent as they imagined. It may even raise uncomfortable questions about the role they played in the relationship. Rather than accepting those possibilities, they often continue searching for explanations that preserve their self-image. They may convince themselves your happiness is temporary, that someone else is responsible for your success, or that you are pretending to be at peace. These explanations allow them to avoid confronting the reality that people can thrive after leaving unhealthy environments. Sometimes they attempt to re-enter your life during this period of growth. They may congratulate you on your achievements, reach out with unexpected kindness, or express curiosity about how you have been doing. These interactions can feel confusing because they seem so different from the behavior you previously experienced. It is natural to wonder whether they have changed or whether they finally appreciate your value. While genuine personal growth is possible for anyone willing to do deep self-reflection and consistent work, it is important not to confuse renewed attention with transformed character. In many cases, your progress simply captured their attention because it disrupted expectations they once held with complete confidence. Your independence reminds them that you were capable of becoming everything they insisted you could never be. One of the greatest misconceptions about healing is that it is meant to prove someone wrong. Many people become motivated by the desire to make an ex regret losing them or to demonstrate that they were underestimated. While those feelings are understandable in the early stages of recovery, they cannot sustain lasting growth. If your healing depends on another person's reaction, then they still occupy the center of your emotional world. True healing begins when your progress is no longer performed for an audience. You pursue peace because you deserve peace. You build confidence because you value yourself. You establish healthy relationships because mutual respect matters. Whether someone notices these changes becomes increasingly unimportant because your sense of identity is no longer dependent on external approval. Ironically, this is often the point where you become most unforgettable. Not because you are trying to be remembered, but because you are no longer trying to be understood by someone unwilling to see your worth. There is a quiet strength in people who have survived emotional manipulation without allowing bitterness to define them. They learn to speak with honesty instead of fear. They learn to love without abandoning themselves. They learn to forgive without inviting repeated harm. They discover that boundaries do not push healthy people away. They simply reveal who is benefiting from their absence. This kind of transformation cannot be manufactured. It develops through courage, patience, and countless moments of choosing growth over resentment. Your success does not erase the pain you experienced, but it changes what that pain produces. Instead of becoming more fearful, you become more discerning. Instead of becoming harder, you become wiser. Instead of allowing past wounds to determine your future relationships, you begin creating healthier patterns built on trust, respect, and emotional maturity. This transformation quietly dismantles every false prediction that once surrounded your adult life. The person who was expected to remain broken becomes whole. The person who was expected to remain dependent becomes independent. The person who was expected to remain silent finds a confident voice. These realities are difficult for anyone to dismiss, especially someone whose identity depended on believing they fully understood and defined your future. Your growth becomes undeniable evidence that your value was never determined by their opinion. It was always present, waiting for the moment you chose to believe it yourself. And once that truth takes root, no distorted narrative has the power to rewrite the life you are now building. One of the most powerful moments in the aftermath of a narcissistic relationship is not the day you leave, it is the day you begin to grow. At first, healing may seem invisible. You are simply trying to make it through each day without carrying the weight of constant criticism, confusion, or emotional exhaustion. You are learning to trust your instincts again. You are rebuilding confidence that was slowly chipped away by manipulation. You are discovering that peace feels unfamiliar only because chaos became your normal. Yet while these changes may appear small to you, they represent something much larger to a narcissistic person. Every step you take toward emotional health quietly challenges the story they created about you. The stronger you become, the harder it is for them to believe the narrative they once depended on. That is why your growth often becomes something they cannot easily ignore. People with narcissistic traits often rely on a carefully constructed version of reality that protects their self-image. In that version, they are usually the stronger person, the wiser person, or the person who always has the upper hand. If a relationship ends, they may convince themselves that you were weak, incapable, overly emotional, or destined to struggle without them. These beliefs allow them to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about their own behavior. Instead of asking whether they contributed to the relationship's problems, they create explanations that preserve their sense of superiority. This distorted narrative becomes emotionally comfortable because it shields them from accountability. As long as they believe you cannot thrive without them, they never have to question the role they played in your pain. For a while, these assumptions may even appear accurate. After leaving a difficult relationship, it is normal to feel overwhelmed. You may experience grief, anxiety, loneliness, or uncertainty. There may be days when getting out of bed feels like an accomplishment. You may wonder if they were right about your limitations. You may question your decisions or feel afraid of starting over. These emotions are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you are recovering from an experience that deeply affected your confidence. Healing rarely looks impressive in the beginning. It often feels messy, slow, and frustrating. But beneath the surface, something important is happening. You are slowly reclaiming parts of yourself that were buried beneath fear and self-doubt. As time passes, the changes become more noticeable. You begin making decisions without seeking permission. You stop apologizing simply to keep the peace. You learn that saying no does not make you selfish. You begin spending time with people who respect your boundaries instead of testing them. You discover interests and goals that were neglected while you focused all your energy on keeping someone else satisfied. Your laughter becomes genuine instead of forced. Your confidence grows because it is rooted in self-respect rather than someone else's approval. These are not dramatic transformations designed to impress others. They are quiet signs that your identity is returning. This is where the narcissistic person's expectations begin to fall apart. They expected your confidence to disappear permanently. Instead, it returns stronger than before. They expected your independence to fade. Instead, it becomes one of your greatest strengths. They expected you to remain emotionally attached to them. Instead, you begin building a life that no longer revolves around their opinions or actions. Every healthy decision you make quietly disproves another assumption they held about you. Without saying a single word, your life becomes evidence that their predictions were wrong. One reason this can be so unsettling for them is because your growth forces them to confront inconsistency. If they truly believed you were incapable, how are you succeeding? If they insisted no one else would appreciate you, why are healthy relationships entering your life? If they claimed you would always return, why are you moving forward with confidence? These questions create discomfort because they expose cracks in the narrative they worked so hard to maintain. Instead of acknowledging those cracks, they may search for explanations that protect their ego. They may tell themselves your happiness is temporary. They may assume someone else is responsible for your success. They may convince themselves you are pretending to be at peace. These explanations allow them to preserve their self-image without accepting that your growth happened despite everything they believed. Your healing also changes the emotional balance that once existed between you. During the relationship, they may have relied on your need for validation. They knew how to influence your emotions because they understood your fears and insecurities. But healing changes those patterns. You begin recognizing manipulation for what it is instead of interpreting it as love. You stop feeling responsible for fixing problems that were never yours to solve. You realize that healthy love does not require you to abandon your own needs. These realizations make you emotionally stronger, and emotional strength is difficult to control. The tactics that once produced immediate reactions begin losing their effectiveness. Silence no longer frightens you. Criticism no longer defines you. Guilt no longer controls your choices. The person who once seemed easy to manipulate becomes increasingly difficult to influence. One of the greatest misunderstandings about personal growth is that it should make someone else regret their behavior. While that outcome may occasionally happen, it is not the true purpose of healing. If your goal is to make another person jealous, guilty, or ashamed, your attention is still focused on them. Genuine healing shifts that focus back where it belongs. You begin asking different questions. Instead of wondering whether they miss you, you ask whether you are becoming the person you want to be. Instead of wondering whether they recognize your value, you recognize it yourself. Instead of hoping they change, you invest your energy in your own transformation. This shift is incredibly powerful because it removes them from the center of your emotional life. Ironically, this is often when they notice you the most. Confidence that comes from within has a different quality than confidence performed for attention. It is calm rather than loud. It does not seek approval because it already possesses self-respect. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth through endless explanations or constant achievements. Your peace becomes visible in the way you carry yourself, the boundaries you maintain, and the relationships you choose. Healthy people are naturally drawn to that kind of stability, while controlling people often find it confusing because it cannot be manipulated. Your growth also serves as a reminder that people are capable of rewriting their future. Emotional manipulation often convinces someone that they will never change, never succeed, and never escape the identity assigned to them. Healing proves otherwise. Every step forward demonstrates that the labels placed upon you were never permanent truths. They were opinions shaped by someone else's need to maintain control. The moment you stop believing those opinions, they begin losing their power. Your identity is no longer defined by criticism, rejection, or unrealistic expectations. It is shaped by your choices, your character, and your willingness to keep growing even when the journey is difficult. The beautiful reality is that genuine growth does not require revenge, confrontation, or public recognition. It speaks through consistency. It appears in the calmness of your decisions, the confidence of your boundaries, and the joy you find in living authentically. It transforms not only the way you see yourself, but also the way you approach every future relationship. Instead of seeking people who validate your wounds, you begin seeking people who respect your values. Instead of repeating unhealthy patterns, you create new ones built on trust, honesty, and mutual care. In doing so, you quietly dismantle every false story that once tried to define your future, proving not through words but through your life that your greatest strength was never there. Approval, it was your ability to heal, grow, and become the person you were always meant to be.